calm, focused happiness.
Hey, Mindful Tribe, welcome to the show today. I'm here with a gentleman who, well, he faced a very, very serious challenge in his life. He lost his identity, he lost his confidence, he lost his purpose. He wasn't sure even whether he might lose his 22-year marriage, but he was able to move forward and make things happen again for him. I'm here today with my guest, Steve Cloward. Steve, are you in mindfulness mode today?
Absolutely.
That's good. That's awesome. So, Steve, what does mindfulness mean to you?
Real quick before I answer that 22-year marriage in 7 days will be 33. So I just had to point that out because that's wasn't easy, but we're getting there.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you. I gotta congratulate my wife probably because she's the one that endured a lot of difficulties. But anyways, mindfulness, it's interesting you bring that up because in one of my businesses, 3 of my boys work for me, and we just got done with a meeting that we have on Fridays at from 8 to 9, and it's if I'm being just brutally honest, it's been a little challenging for me at times because as a guy who's been an entrepreneur his whole life, regardless of ups and downs and etc., sometimes I lose that perspective of being mindful of the fact that, number one, I don't know everything and never will, but it's like when I went to prison, for example, you find out very quickly the people that you love the most are the people that you end up hurting oftentimes the most. And the only thing I can contribute that to is we just get in routines and we take those people for granted often. And so, as I've been really, I continually try to work on myself and, do that inner work. And, when you show up in prison, all of a sudden you're in there's not a whole lot of time that passes before you're just stuck looking at that man in the mirror. Yeah. And, in this business, like I say, it's been a bit challenging at times because I'm putting my boys in that spot where I'm not really mindful of them and their abilities, their talents, and their skill sets, and the value that brings. I mean, so, mindfulness, there's a whole, bunch of different ways to look at it. But that was just one that really I was focused on this morning because that's something I've really been trying to work on, because it doesn't matter who you're working with, whether it's family or not. You're gonna create, I would just call them barriers to reaching the success you're trying to, if you don't have the correct, really just energy or the respect and the value of other people. And that was something my grandfather actually taught me very early on as an entrepreneur. And no matter who it is working with you, whether it's that from your person that takes care of cleaning your bathrooms all the way up to your manager, everybody is valuable as heck. But anyway, that's a long answer, but just being mindfulness, there's just so many ways to look at that. But really, I've just been focused particularly on being mindful of others, regardless of whether it's my boys are in business or not.
Yeah. Well, I think it's awesome that you have your 3 boys helping you in your business. That's fantastic. My son helped me in my business for a couple of years, and that, like you say, it has its certain number of challenges when it's a father-son kind of deal, but it's also has certain kind of rewards as well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's really cool. So, well, let's just dig right in and let's talk about, how did you end up in federal prison?
Yeah, I'll jump right to that. And I think I made it clear before, and when I responded earlier, I'm an open book. So there's no question off the table, just so you know.
Yeah.
When people hear about, like, the name of my podcast, for example, they often think that because it talks about addiction and indictment, that I went to prison probably because of my addiction,
right?
Which had nothing to do with it. I was sober for many years before the whole federal prison thing came about. I had a, very successful real estate appraisal firm residential real estate. Got 8 guys in my office, full-time appraising, and an office down in southern Utah with 3 guys. And, it allowed me to really create that business where I just had a lot of time freedom. I was doing other things. And there was a guy who was doing a lot of big jumbo purchases. And basically this was in the mid 2005 through 7. And basically what was happening, and I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of people were doing this, not that it was right, because it wasn't, but people were basically using straw buyers. And what a straw buyer is somebody that they say is just going to buy this home, which it would be in that person's name, but they'd be using their credit and everything to go through the loan process and everything. And whoever was working that deal was like paying them for using their credit to buy it, but they never anticipated living in it. So in my case, what was happening was, one of the realtors who was really known for the big jumbo sales here in Utah and Utah County in particular, he would go to, his network of people who would have, $1.2 million to $3 million homes. And particularly in my case, they were all, 4 of the 5 homes were in a gated community. And he, say the home was they might have been in at 1.3, for example, but there was a comp that this realtor had kind of created. A guy who was a huge donor to Brigham Young University, and I've heard he was the largest home builder in Arizona. He had built a home in this gated community called Stonegate. And, when he's building a home for himself, or, his builder is, that's not a transaction through, the internet or the MLS per se, but the realtor can put that on the MLS, which he did. And if I remember right, it was at $2.4 million. So of course, I didn't do any of the appraisals in my case. There were people in my office. But with that sell on the MLS, our job as appraisers is, we are to, basically, I'm trying to think of the words you use. It's been a long time since I was appraising, but the MLS data is deemed to be reliable. And then our responsibility, other than just communicating with the realtor, that's really where it ends. And which they did, of course. And the fact that it's on the MLS, that's what it's saying it is. And so that, of course, was a comp that they could use right in that same gated community. So when they're appraising that 1.3 home that maybe, but then this other one sold 6 months ago at 2.3, then easily they can hang a lot of value on that one because it's so close. So there's so many similarities that you have to heavily weight that main comp. Of course, you've got supporting comparables. Sure. And anyway, so what would happen was then the people he would ask if they wanted to sell their home, because he said, I can get you probably 1.8 million or 1.9, whatever the number is. And then the house that was being purchased by the buyer, they would do a double close, which the title company then is facilitating the down payment on the house by basically doing, a refi, cash out refi right on top of that first on the close. And so the down payment will be sucked out of that new mortgage. And they would say the homeowner maybe got 1.7 million. If it was 1.2, then that quote, the guy that I knew actually that has to do the appraisals, he would then pull out a couple $100,000. That's his profit, which is where, that's a problem the way that the title company was doing it. But it was also a problem because the person that they were using their credit, the straw buyer, that was not going to be a primary residence.
Okay.
And so even if they legally put secondary residence, what they did not, that would then change how much down would have to be on a loan for a secondary versus a primary.
I see.
So that was the what was happening. And, the appraisals, were not fraudulent by the guys in my office. In fact, the fact that they funded off the appraisals my guys did proves on a jumbo you have to have 2 appraisals. They did not, they fund on the lowest of the 2. So they funded off of my guys' appraisals, which means, and I found out who did the other appraisals, a guy and a gal, So two different appraisers that were doing several of the second appraisals on the various deals. And they were being paid $5,000 for their appraisals, which right there, that's enticement to get them to push and get a high value.
Right.
They charge the standard $1,200 on a big jumbo like that. And there's a lot of other factors that went into it. The guy that was doing this, which was the main guy in my case, his folks died in a plane crash in 1979 that my folks were supposed to be on.
Oh.
And my folks backed out the night before because my mom felt like she had to be at this church function. And so they took their two younger daughters and they flew out of the Provo airport, not to get too deep into that story, but it was a very snowy day on January 9th, 1979. I was in fifth grade at the time. And my dad called the oldest son and said, "Hey, have you heard from your dad?" And at this point, nobody had any questions, but my dad, for some reason, felt something. And when he hung up, he just told him, "Hey, when you hear from him, tell him to call Sherm." And as soon as my dad hung up, he got our whole family together and went and had a prayer. And my dad was just sobbing like he knew something was up. They crashed and killed all of them, but nothing even came out, like the beacon or beeper, whatever happens in plane crashes. It didn't go off for 5 days.
Wow.
It was really weird because it did some pretty ugly damage and obviously the bodies and things. And so I think that was, I just look at the whole situation. It was kind of maybe time to just prepare the boys, and three boys stayed back. But anyway, so it was the youngest of those three boys who was doing these double close deals. And, call it what you want, guilt by association. I don't know. We weren't close friends or anything, but, they threw me into the conspiracy charge, and because, my appraisal office did them, and that's just what happened. And I ended up in federal prison for 14, and I got a 33-month sentence. But the only positive that I've ever found with my addiction to opiates, because I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, that's how it all started, but was that I qualified in federal prison. There's really only two ways to get out earlier than the sentence. Is either, your people call it a rat. I don't really call it that. You testify on some other case that benefits you to get you out early, or you get in this residential drug and alcohol program. And because of my addiction, I actually qualified for that, which can get you out up to 1 year early.
Okay.
So instead of doing the 33 months, I might have gotten a couple of months halfway house. So I would have done probably at least 31. Because of that program, I did 14 and a half months and then did 2 months in the halfway house.
And did your appraisal company still continue to operate while you were there?
No, I surrendered my license voluntarily, but I knew they were going to take it anyway, which they ended up doing. But no, I had, originally my brother started with me as a partner. I have two younger brothers, and my second brother just below me was my partner, and he also had addiction issues. And we had an agreement when I got sober, he then wanted to consider getting sober, which he did. And when he did, then we had an agreement, if anyone relapsed, that we could kick the other one out. Because obviously then it's one thing when you're both putting each other at risk, but when one of you is putting the other at risk, you got to think a little bit more about it. And he struggled a bit. We ended up splitting. It ended up being a positive. It wasn't a nasty situation. But then my very youngest brother worked for me, who continued to work for me. I tried to sell him the business, but that's a whole nother story. Everything's cool now, but he, wanted to go to mediation, which I did, which I thought was stupid because he said there's no value in it. And I was like, okay, well, I guess you'll just walk right into this business and take it then, which is what happened. So yeah, when I went to prison, I had no income. Of course, I lost everything. Whether I had assets that they could take or not, they would have,
Sure.
But I sold everything I could, paid off debts, and then just faced it. And it was ugly, but I tell people that it was a blessing, even though I say that there's things I did during my addiction that would have definitely put me in jail, possibly prison. This conspiracy case, there's nothing I did that I was guilty of, but it was still a blessing because, I was a good dad. I'm a very loyal friend to a fault, probably, or at least maybe not friend, but when it comes to business, I'm probably loyal to a fault. I get stabbed in the back, people take advantage, but I'd rather be that way than the other way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get to prison, you just realize so many things, when you're stuck there. And, even though I believed I was a good dad, which I was, but I wasn't present, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything was about money and stuff, and, trying to think that the stuff defined me and trust other people, which is just foolish, it's just ridiculous to think that way, even though it's easy to get caught in that trap.
Yeah.
But a thing I've realized too is most of the time that we worry about or think that other people think things about us, very rarely is that ever the case.
It's all within our own heads.
100%.
Yeah. Well, then you had to regain your identity afterwards. And what was that like? How long did that take you?
Oh, man. That was so brutal.
Yeah.
Like I said, my dad was a dentist, and when he retired, I remember him talking to me about that and saying, "Yeah, Steve, I just feel like I don't know who I am now. I'm not Dr. Cloward."
Right.
And I didn't really get that.
Yeah.
But after I came out of prison, boy, did I get slapped upside the head and really understand that. Because, I've had a successful business. I was involved in community stuff. Charity stuff. And then all of a sudden you have nothing. And as sad as it is to say, I think as a society, it's pretty normal to have our jobs define us.
Yeah, it is.
Careers. And that's just the way it is, which is kind of messed up, but that's just a fact. And, the trap I got stuck in was, you come out and have that happen, and then you have I didn't have much confidence. And that's a choice, and when at least my experience, this may not be true always, when you get to a certain level of success and then you lose everything and you're back at ground zero, I forgot that it took me years to get there. Yeah. And so because of impatience and thinking it happened overnight, I just didn't stay focused, and I was chasing things, and, frankly, didn't know really what I wanted to do. And when you're in prison, you tell yourself, and you would do it, you would, if you could leave that day and go work at McDonald's, you'd do it.
Yeah.
But boy, does that perspective change quick once you get back into real life too, and I honestly can boil it down to just two things, and it's that confidence and then mindset. I was literally stuck for about 8 years.
For about how long?
8 years.
8 years. Wow.
I just sat there, kind of, obviously there's some victim mode happening.
Yeah.
And there's also, I think, there was a little laziness too. And I'm a hard worker. I enjoy work. Unless I have something to do, I just prefer to be working. But that's hard when you're not sure, you're not committed or enjoying anything that you're doing too. And so it just made it tough. And until I really owned it, it's like, I kind of fell into the telco industry, TV, satellite, home security. And because I had a decent opportunity with that, but I never went all in because I didn't love it. And I just kind of, had ups and downs, just never really committed. And, I started to hire coaches and, buy courses and, and really try to focus on myself. And, if you believe that you're going to hire that manager or that person that's really going to make your business take off, you're just fooling yourself. And so until I just owned the fact that nobody was coming to save me, it was 100% up to me, nothing was going to change. And that's when I just started to really work on my mind and try to really reprogram my mind, is the only way to say it.
So it's more the work you did yourself that made the difference rather than the work you did with the coaches and other people like that.
They helped me see things that I wasn't seeing,
Yeah,
for sure. But in fact, it was one coach actually that, I actually knew him from way back in the day, because he was we found out my office did appraise stuff for him because he was a mortgage broker, but I knew of him. I didn't know him from that, but I was with a group of guys, we were working, and, one thing that he had me do was, he had talked about, he calls it a conscious self-creation statement. And that is, your I ams, I haves, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really dialed in and focused on that. And, they say that if you can read it, write it, see it, and hear it, so all 4 different things, obviously the bigger impact it would have. I got to the point where I, obviously wrote it out and I recorded it. But once I memorized it, I would literally say it every day the second I stepped into the shower. And I would just say it like clockwork. And this is something I'm really into now, because it really proved to me, even though I'd, learned about The Secret and the Law of Attraction,
Mm-hmm.
you got to take it to a different level than just a vision board or thinking something. And so when I really started to focus on it, the power of words are way more incredible than we can comprehend, I believe, as well as thought, because we're all just energy. And so as I started to say those things, literally within 2 years, everything had manifested in my life but one thing, and it was like, wow, I didn't really do anything different. Well, that's really not fair, because the things I did do different, as simple as they may seem, to me, they seem like they're the hardest, because they're not hard. They don't take a lot of time. So we seem to blow them off. At least I do. And as I've worked with other people, and, it seems to be pretty normal. And that is the little things like that conscious self-creation, whether it's reading 10 pages, whatever you decide a day, or listening to podcasts, just focusing some time on you, exercising, even if it's only 10 minutes or 15 minutes, because that's something I always struggled with and I've never enjoyed. And, when I realized that you don't have to kid yourself and think because somebody does one thing a certain way, say the whole morning routine, because that's a big thing that people do.
Mm-hmm.
I think we get stuck when we look at, say, the successful people, and they say this is what they do on their morning routine, and we believe that we have to do that kind of morning routine.
Yes.
That is a myth. You have to do what is best for you, what works for you. But the key is those little tiny things, even if it's, 2 or 3 different things that are only 10 or 15 minutes a morning, so maybe you spend 30 to 45 minutes. Those are the things that really shifted, because those little tiny wins each day were the things that started to grow my confidence back. And between those things, and then, like I say, that conscious self-creation statement, other than saying it, and then really the thing I really tried to do was visualize and feel what my life would be like if I was that person or achieved those things. And those things aren't always financial or, material things, but it's okay to have those too, but those were really the keys to what finally kicked me out of that victim mode and just being stuck.
And what business did you start that was successful at that point?
I started my podcast and started doing some consulting. I still actually, believe it or not, have that telco business. And I have a software business as my main focus now, as well as consulting.
I see. And your podcast is called Life After Addiction and Indictment. You mentioned that already. So yeah, so I'm just really interested. Do you meditate? Do you get focused that way? Tell us about that.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm an open book, and that's something, as much as I still do it, I struggle. That's something I really struggle with still, which if you listen to my words, and that's what I catch, I'm aware of. It's kind of like as an addict, until you admit, you've got a problem, you're not going to be able to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so I try to pay attention to those things, because if I'm going to consistently tell myself I'm not good at it or I struggle at it, that's going to continue to hold me back.
Yeah.
But I think what I've recently just done and just owned is that it's not easy, and it's okay, if you have thoughts that come, but the key is just doing the practice, because it's like anything. It takes time. You get better and better. And then consistency is really, to me, the key to anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a huge thing.
It is, for sure.
Huge.
And do you still suffer from Crohn's disease?
I'll knock on wood, no. And it's crazy, because I came off a Mormon mission in 1987 after 3 months, and I went out at a whopping, I was 19 years old, went out at a whopping like 154. And within 3.5 months, I was 123 pounds, kind of gray jaundicey looking. And I just woke up every morning with these gut aches, and I didn't know what was wrong. And I saw a doctor out there. They didn't think anything. And to be honest with you, as growing up in a religion, especially the Mormon religion in Utah, it wasn't acceptable to come off a mission. And I went on a mission, didn't want to, but I went because I was expected to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not involved anymore with the church, but my dad in particular told me he's not cool if I come home, but he'll accept it if I wait until first week in April, because the church has their biannual conference, and maybe I'd hear something that would just change everything for me.
Okay.
Which I knew wasn't going to happen. And he also did say, at that point, it's between you and the Lord. I've never been one to feel like I have that real close connection with God, through prayer or whatever. But for some reason, I just felt I was supposed to go home. And I'm a pretty prideful guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was difficult to even consider. But I just knew something wasn't right. And so one morning, anyway, he tells me, get through that first week of April when they typically have the conference. But I was so damn depressed, that I wanted to just sleep until that day came, because I knew at this point, and I felt totally at peace with it. And one morning, I think it was like March 23rd, you have a companion, and he was in showering for the morning. And I just went in the kitchen. I grabbed a whole handful of aspirin. I never thought I want to die. I didn't think I wanted to kill myself. I just wanted to be sick, man. I just wanted to sleep because I was so depressed. And so I took a handful of aspirin, and my companion and I, luckily we had a good relationship. And, a little while later, I told him, well, actually, no, we left, we went and visited some people. We were riding our bikes home, and I'm behind, he's in front. And I was starting to lose it. My ears were ringing. And so when we got to the apartment, I went right into my room and just got on my bed and was holding on to the side of the bed because I wanted to just rage. I was ready to just lose it.
Mm-hmm.
And he came and asked me what's up. I told him. And so he called a neighbor to take us to the hospital. And, they tested me and said, you're lucky not to be in toxic shock and yada, yada. And so my dad flew out the next morning. And as soon as he saw me, he was in tears.
Wow.
Because just looking at me.
Yeah, he didn't realize how sick you were.
Around me didn't notice because, they're seeing me every day.
Yeah.
But for dad to see his son 4 months later, that doesn't look like him.
Right.
So get on a plane, we come home, and 2 nights later, I'm in the ER. They thought it was appendicitis. They cut me open.
Uh-huh.
And, I did have a appendix problem, but found a ulcerated, perforated black bowel, cut 16 inches of my bowel out. And that's when I was diagnosed with Crohn's. And that's when I got introduced to the pain pills.
Wow. And so what kind of pain pills were you on?
Oh, geez. I don't even remember what they started me on, but it probably was either hydrocodone or oxycodone or.
Yeah.
Then I started chasing them all, of course. And, taking 30 or 40 OxyContin when I finally decided it was time to get sober after 14 years of dancing with the devil. And, there's days I'd drive to work just crying because I didn't back then, this was 2000. I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know what the options were. And
right.
It wasn't nearly as talked about, or I guess acceptable is maybe not the right word, but I just was sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
And I had a situation one day that I was meeting a buddy down at the golf course. We're going to go hit some balls. And the way I get there, you go down in the mouth of Provo Canyon. I was turning to head up what's called University Avenue, and that's about 3 miles down that road. And as I made that turn onto University, it was the weirdest thing. And I had taken a bunch of different pills that day. And from my neck down, I went numb. And then it's like I had this visual of me looking down on my car with my body in it. And it just freaked me out. So by the time I get to the driving range, I'm a mess. I tell my buddy, and my gastroenterologist, I knew where he lived, and we were actually somewhat friends. His son had worked for me at my dad's car wash that I was operating. And so I drove to his house. He lived in a gated community. And so just talking to him through the speaker, and here I am, visualist. I'm scared straight. Like, I'm done at this point. I think I about died basically. And he had a party going on. So he talks to me through the speaker. And so he called an internist doctor of his, friend of his. And at this point, I'd never even heard of OxyContin. And that doctor said, well, I'm tied up. I won't be able to see him for like 3 days. So Tom Dickinson was my gastroenterologist. Why don't you write him a script for 8 OxyContin, and then I'll see him, and probably he's probably self-medicating, and I'll get him on some antidepressants and we'll deal with it. Well, that just shifted my brain, And then I started to have this belief that I needed them, and then it went on for 3 more years using OxyContin, and up to some days 40 of those a day.
Wow.
So very grateful and lucky to be alive, honestly.
Yeah, I guess. And what was your wife like through all this? How was she supportive?
Man, it was tough. We, like I said, 33 years coming up, and we got married in 1990, and 2 years into it, I'd started taking the pills and abusing them, more and more after we had been married. And in fact, I remember having an ear infection when we got married and getting a prescription before we left on our honeymoon. And of course, I took them all. And it's about 2 years into our marriage. Now my brain chemistry has totally changed. And I literally, one day, she comes home from work, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I just told her, think about how brutal this must have been, and how, I blindsided her and just said, yeah, I don't love you anymore.
Wow.
And then I left.
Oh, wow.
And there's so many things that transpired over the next 18 months. Second son was born. I came home 2 different times and then left again. And one night I had the flu. I had gotten sober, at least for this period of time, to where the fog had lifted. And, if you've ever heard about 28 days, the movie 28 Days, like, that is so real. It's crazy. And so here I am at home with the flu, sick. And in fact, it was our second home, but a home we built. And she was a nurse at the physician's office I had seen since I was a kid. And so, all her coworkers, of course, the doctors knew me. So I wasn't about to call her or call the office because I was too embarrassed. At this point, she was living at her parents' house. And one night, Sunday night, I just thought, I got to talk to her, see if she can, because back then she could literally bring home anything, a shot, she could bring home a Z-Pack, whatever.
Okay.
Different back then. And so that's what I was kind of looking for. But at the same time, the fog had lifted. And I'm thinking, what in the hell am I doing? Like, I believe that I'm cool with being a weekend dad, or however that looks. That's crazy, and yeah, I do love her. And so I called her, and this was like in 1992. So you got to think, how many people had cell phones back then? We didn't, but she had one mounted in her car.
Okay.
Parents live literally about 2 miles from a grocery store. When I dialed that phone, she just happened to be between her parents and that grocery store on a Sunday night, which is something normally wouldn't have happened because her parents are very staunch Mormons, but they were out of milk and bread. So she was going to the store simply for that. And I happened to call when she was in the car. And I said, I'm sick. I talked about that. And I said, but other than that, I don't know what to say, but I need to talk to you. It had gotten to the point where even with our backgrounds, Mormon religion, I had been dating someone, even her, she had been seeing someone a little bit, and her parents were cool with it, even though we're not divorced. But that's how ugly it had gone on. I guess not ugly. It never got ugly, but it wasn't great either. But
right,
gone on that long. And in fact, I still occasionally, if I run into my old attorney, I thank him, because he'd have been on top of things, things would have moved faster. But she came over, we talked, and thank the good Lord that, she said my parents are going to kill me if I consider this, And anyway, obviously we got back together. And then as far as the addiction, to answer your question, there's a lot of times that you put your loved ones in situations that are tough, like whether it's family functions. I can remember being, say, at Christmas afternoons at her parents, and, I'm going in a bedroom and sleeping or something. And, she's basically then lying to people saying, oh, he's sick or whatever. Yeah, I might have been sick, but probably wasn't. Sick would be if I didn't have any pills, but obviously I did. And just dumb things like that.
Sure.
And then, the biggest problem is, even though she stuck with it, like I said, I was a very functioning addict. So, until something really poor decision I made or something I was doing that was dumb, and maybe I got caught. It didn't affect a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not even fair because that's really, frankly, a lie. I didn't think it affected a ton, but it
Right.
affected who I was being. And whether that means short, whether that means, not mindful of her, a ton of those things that I wasn't seeing, but probably not miserable enough, even though she wasn't happy, she wasn't willing to kick me to the curb at that stage because of various reasons, obviously kids and whatever, and hoping, but until I was able to just become honest with myself and then honest with her, it was tough. But
Wow.
I do believe everything happens for a reason. And we even though I was sober for many years before I went to prison, until I got out of prison and learned a few things, we were still, marriage is tough, relationships are tough, it's work. And
It is.
until you commit and really put that other person first, it can be tough. And one thing that I learned really just only 6 years ago that I think is a huge, probably one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever received, whether it's for your marriage or relationship or even business relationships, is living in agreements instead of expectations. Because everything in expectation sets you up and the other person to have issues, because I expected my wife to do X when she should have known, but she had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Just all these crazy things that we can tell ourselves. And it's so much easier when you just talk, lay things out, and you have agreements on how things operate. And then, if something comes up, you just try to proactively address it. And it reduces a whole lot of stress and anger and misery and makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you a question about bullying because I've worked in this field for quite a long time. Do you have a story about bullying where mindfulness would have somehow made a difference?
Well, if it was me being bullied, yes. But if it was me bullying, I can't think of a time, but I'm sure in my addiction, you could look at it that way probably.
Yeah.
But I guess the way when I really think of mindfulness, for some reason, I just automatically go to, selfishness versus selfless.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the things that I've learned and tried to implement in my life is really shifting that, because I still fight that. I'd be lying if I said I don't. That's something I get angry when I talk to God sometimes. Like, man, I've been humbled to my knees in, ways that I would have never dreamt. And like I said, there's times that I never felt like I could pray and really have that connection, but that comes down to also me not ever getting quiet enough and paying attention. But when I was called by my attorney on a Sunday morning, when I had already sat down with him and we were planning to go to trial, and it's 10 days away, and he tells me on a Sunday morning, I'm meeting with the feds that night in Salt Lake City at 6 to come up with my plea.
Mm-hmm.
I freaked out. Like, I didn't know what to do, because now he's telling me I'm going to go say something that I'm saying I did that I didn't do.
Uh-huh.
And that was something I was struggling with. I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I went to my parents, and that was the first time I've ever led with the Lord in my life like that, because I had to know before I left that house that was the best option for me. And man, I did. And then the same thing happened. I don't want to get off too far on this tangent, but I have to say this too, because when I was in prison, I'm about 3 weeks in, I'm this, victim, depressed, and the marriage was rough, obviously, before leaving.
Yeah.
My wife knew things were messed up, but she's basically booted out of her dream home. 30, was already in foreclosure, but 30 days after I leave, she's got to move out, and that was just brutal. I call home. It's 3 weeks in, and I said, "Do you even care about us?" And she said, "I don't have time to worry about us." And that just, like, being the selfish person, I was going to say something else.
Yeah.
I just felt like my heart got ripped out. and went back to my cube. I call it cubicle, 'cause I wasn't in a cell or anything, but once again, I just prayed. I'd like, if I'm going to make it through this, I got to know that my family's going to make it, and
Yeah.
for some reason I knew, and so I was, after that, I just had this peace and everything moved forward. But anyway, I don't apologize for getting off on that tangent, but it was just, yeah, I don't know why that came to mind.
Wow. You've been through an incredibly challenging time, that's for sure. And then the fact that you're able to pull yourself together and move forward. I mean, it took you some time, but it took a lot of commitment and a lot of work to do that. I can tell.
Yeah, like I
So,
said earlier, everything happens for a reason, I believe. And, like I said, I needed that time out in prison, even though I felt it was unjust and unfair.
mhm.
It was, it was the deal that had to happen. And
Yeah.
there's no doubt I wouldn't, I think we have to look at our challenges because everybody has them, different levels, and mine aren't the worst by any stretch, but it's
Yeah.
what do we choose? How do we choose to respond? I during that 8 years, I wasn't choosing to respond negatively, but I wasn't choosing to respond positive. I was just going through the day, right?
Yeah.
I was going wherever the wind blew me. And then I just finally, we have to make a choice, because that's really what it comes down to.
Mhm.
We are in control of everything. And, if you really look around, if you want to evaluate yourself, that's the best place to start. But, there's certain people I can look at. My brother has an ex-wife who was just the most negative person, always had this kind of frown on the face. Like the highlight of the day was going to get her Diet Coke. And then you look at the person who, several in this county that I know personally, who are just incredibly successful. What is the difference? It's 100% what you choose, and then what
Yeah.
you think,
Yeah.
because one guy in particular I'm thinking of, he's multi-billionaire and created Vivint Smart Home. And, everyone used to say he's the golden boy. Well, okay, he's the golden boy, but why? He meant some people, a lot of people say he's not even the smartest guy.
Mhm.
Neither am I, but he made choices who to surround himself with and who he chose to be around. And it really is that simple. But when you're depressed and things are rough, it's not that simple. I've got a picture on my wall right over there of my best friend. I met him in high school, and he was from the West Side and a cowboy, and Wranglers and white T-shirt, and I'm from the East Side on the hill, and
Yeah.
we played golf on the golf team together. We became best friends. Well, he died of colorectal cancer back in 2006. And if he showed up right now in my office, as soon as we finished, if I was in some of the places I've been that are very dark, and he said, "Hey, there's a private jet waiting for us. We got unlimited funds. We're going to play golf all around the world as long as you want," I would say, "Nah, I don't really feel like it."
Uh,
That's how messed up you get.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But people, I believe the majority of people have good hearts and want to help people. And the toughest thing to do, at least for me, is asking for help. But if we'll just ask, there's plenty of people that will help. If anybody's listening that is struggling with anything, even if you're just in a dark place, it has nothing to do with addiction. That doesn't matter. You can always reach out to me. I'll always take the time to, have a conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. Steve, as we move forward in the interview, I want to ask you 5 quick answer questions. So just 30-second answers are perfect. The first one is this: who is one person who has been a powerful mindfulness influence for you?
My grandfather.
Mm, awesome. My second question is about emotions. How has mindfulness helped you to deal with your emotions differently?
Well, when you are aware of, mindful of what is causing them, then you have a lot better chance of dealing with them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for
So I used to
sure.
let my emotions create my responses.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk
They
about
still do
breathing.
sometimes.
Yeah, what was that?
I said, and they still do occasionally.
Yeah, yeah.
Try not to.
Yeah. Let's talk about breathing. Do you have any tips or any thoughts about breathing and how breathing can help people?
Oh man, absolutely. I don't have a personal way that I always do some of that, But I have a friend of mine, his name's Bobish Said, and he has some breathing techniques. They're similar to what Tony Robbins teaches.
Mhm.
But, there's times that when I think of that during days, like there's, days in the afternoon, maybe I'm struggling and lethargic. If I'll stop and do some of those breathing things, it's amazing. Or even meditating, both, either one. It's amazing how it can shift your energy. You don't, I can't even explain it.
Yeah.
Feel like I don't have that lethargic feeling anymore. It's just like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a question about a book, and if you can recommend a book related to mindfulness. Have you got any thoughts about that?
Man, not
I know you wrote an
Oh,
ebook called Mindset is the Key. Is that still available?
yeah, it is. It's terrible that I can't the URLs in my head, but
Well, I think it's mindsetisthekey.net.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mindset is the master, because I just one day I said, you know what? Mindset is the key to unlock your life.
Yeah.
If you want to really take control of your mind and your thoughts and the stories that you understand that you're grabbing, and the thoughts that you have and you're grabbing and building stories on top of them, if you can learn those things and start to reprogram your mind, you can change your life.
Right.
Because that's what I experienced,
Yeah, and that book is a free book for anyone who wants it. Any of you listeners, Mindful Tribe, isn't that right?
Yeah, Mindset is the key.net. And there's no follow-up emails that are trying to sell you anything or get you to buy anything, so don't worry about that.
Right.
It's a free book.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any apps that have helped you or that you use to stay focused?
I've used some the Calm meditation app in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the only one I've used.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's just incredible hearing your story and how you've been able to come out the other side. You're still married. You've got 4 boys and a daughter, and you've got grandchildren, and wow.
Granddaughters. I'm a very blessed man, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. That's really incredible that you've been through all this and you made it through. So, do you have any final words of advice for our listeners, Steve?
Yeah, when you mentioned that, it made me think of when I was sitting in prison. 2 quick things. My father-in-law wrote me a letter, and basically it was, there's a scripture related to it. It was basically, this too shall pass. But when you're sitting in it, like, that's really not what you want to hear, because you can't see that,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a lady who was a friend with my mother, she wrote me a letter. Well, she wrote me every month after the first letter, about 3 months in, and sent me several books. And she said, the first letter said, Steve, I can't imagine what it's like. I'm not going to pretend to. But if you will think of 3 things every night that you have to be grateful for that day,
Mm-hmm.
as simple as they may be, I promise you that will help you. She didn't know how I was doing. Of course, whatever my mom told her, but I didn't, they just assumed. But yeah, they were right. This stage, I was pretty depressed and down.
Yeah.
As soon as I got that letter, I did that, and that changed everything, because then and gratitude is the key. Come on.
Yeah.
If you're focused on others and great, things of gratitude, you cannot be sitting in that negative place and that victim mentality. And that changed everything. So even though you don't want to hear it, no matter how bad it might be with what you're dealing with, time does pass, and I promise you, no matter how bad it is, somebody always has it worse, and you can create the life that you choose. It's just a choice.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. And thanks for being on Mindfulness Mode. I really appreciate what you do to help the world, and how you're really moving forward with things that you're doing. And again, your podcast, Life After Addiction and Indictment, I recommend that as well. So thanks for being on the show, Steve.
Oh, Bruce, I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye now.
Okay, take care.